So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, where I actually don't remember where I got this one from, much in the same way as the Minas Ithil battle replay. But occasionally what I will do is if people post up a replay on one of the Discords and say, hey, look at this, just generally, and not just to me, sending them in the DMs, I will pick it up and I will take a look. I don't tend to use them all that much though, just because I do I prefer using the replays that people have actually sent me, because they clearly want me to actually showcase it. But with the replay supply honestly dwindling a little bit, I figured that I would start using replays like this just for the sake of actually having content to record and not just sitting on my hands waiting for stuff to come in. So I think being a little bit proactive is probably the way to go. I can't remember where exactly I got this, like I said, but this is on the Mountain Pass, the classic Mountain Pass map, which has been used for so many Third Age battles in the past. It's been a little while since we've seen it as well, so that's good. And it is a three-way battle, and while you can't really have a lore-friendly theme as such when you have a free-for-all, of course, technically it could be possible. But you'd have to sort of jump through quite a few hoops. But there is actually a theme today, and that is who is going to be victorious. We have evil men, we have good men, and we have the elder races of elves and dwarves, so place your bets now. I would assume that many people, given their preferences, would probably go for the elder races, and that is actually who we are going to be seeing this match from the perspective of today, because we are going to be seeing it from the perspective of DF Warlord, so that makes me wonder if perhaps I got it from the DF Discord. That would make the most sense, I think. But nonetheless, interesting to see that someone as part of the Durin's folk clan is playing as the elves today. But Lothlorien are a very solid excuse me, faction for this sort of map, to be honest with you. But we're also going to get to see potentially the Lorien archers, the really high damage archers, do their thing. You would certainly expect it. Even the lower quality Lorien archers here, like the Marchwarns of the Wood, can kick out a decent amount of damage for their price, and of course they have that poison arrow effect, which gives them a little bit of extra utility to potentially hasten the breaking of lower quality forces than themselves. Lower armour though, so they can be counter skirmish, but that's a problem with the elven lower tiers just generally. That is a weakness you could potentially exploit, and it is something you can also exploit here in the Spears of the Wood. Fantastic in terms of the quality that they offer on the front line for the cost, which is key because for an elven unit they are remarkably cheap. However, low armour once again, which means even from the front, with that shield value in effect, you can still shoot into them and do a decent amount of damage, which is worth paying attention to if you're playing as Lothlorien. But nonetheless, pound for pound, they will do a good job at holding the line, as Spears tend to do, and kick out a little bit more damage because of their better stats being elves. We've also got more spears back here in the shape of the Woodland Protectors, which are of course the spears crossed with javelins. Mostly though you're going to want to use them for their javelins, of course, because as spears they're decent, but they're a little bit underwhelming in that regard. For the most part, it's going to be the javelins that you want to use them for, and in a situation like this where you're going to see lots of choke points throughout the Mountain Pass, going to be quite useful potentially. Blades of the Wood, so he's gone for more of a numbers focused approach actually for Lorien, which is quite interesting. Blades of the Wood, however, like most entry level elven line infantry, can punch well above their weight once they're in melee because of their higher melee defense. Difficult to kill off, better damage. Lower armor is a concern, however. It does mean that you can sort of chip through them with particularly Swordmaster units more easily. Also, lower quantities of men in the unit are also a concern, but also the fact that line infantry, it is designed ultimately to hold and sort of be that durable core, and having lower armor means you can get shot up a little bit more easily, which is a potential concern. But if he's trying to be more of a supporting force here, DF Warlord, then he's definitely going about it the right way, I think. The Loren-armed Axemen are a little bit more commonplace because they are the upper end of Lorien's line infantry. They use an axe, unlike their fellow elves, and it does mean that they can kick out a lot of damage. Most people would rightly prefer the Imladris Guardians because, again, they're a little bit more defensive, they can hold out for longer, but Lorien can deal that damage quite nicely with their infantry, and the Loren-armed Axemen are just one part of that. We also have the Watchers of the Golden Wood with their Silver Thorns, should be really useful. Again, positionally, going to be key to see if they can get into a good position. It's got some Loren-armed Mounted Company. Interesting to see cavalry on this map always. You can be useful, but you don't want to overcommit on it, because if you do, you will find it very difficult to use massive amounts of cavalry because of how easily people can wall up against that with spears and pikes. The Riders of the Golden Wood, a little bit less surprised to see them because they are just a mounted version of the Watchers of the Golden Wood after all, so you have yet more Silverthorn arrows, and of course they can do the business as regular cavalry as well. should they be required to do so. Then we have his dwarven ally here, Stalin's Step Bro. That's interesting. It'll be the gulag for you, undoubtedly. We have Erebor, so marching alongside one of Durin's folk, and he has got some Ironfoot Wargoats. Again, surprised actually to see a couple of units of Ironfoot Wargoats on this occasion. Maybe they were expecting to see a fight out here on the open plain, but I think that was a little bit naive perhaps, because I do know that it was Umbar who had that deployment zone back there. If I were Umbar, I wouldn't want to go cavalry heavy against Lorien and Erebor, to be honest, because it would facilitate having to be really, really aggressive against them, and that can be a terrible idea if you don't execute it properly. Meanwhile, we do have some Ironfoot warriors on the front, again, much in the same way as elves, albeit in a different way. Dwarven line infantry tends to be really efficient for its price point, so you may not have that many of them relative to the humans, the orcs especially, of course, and evil men playing into that as well. But the Ironfoot warriors, pound for pound, will be able to do a really good job potentially on the front line. Ugh, my voice. Doing all this streaming is really taking an impact on it, I think. Ironfoot crossbows though, so they should be really good if they get into the right position as well. Again, getting your ranged units into a position on the mountain pass can really make it very difficult for the enemy to respond to that. Axe Guard of Erebor, really nice high damage unit there. Erebor Legionaries, a really strong unit of line infantry as well. Again, they wield that axe, but that's more common for the dwarves. So similar in many ways to the Loreland Axemen, only with more of a focus around their equipment rather than their actual skill. And then the Highborns and the Obsidian Guard forming the hard, unmoving centre of the Dwarven force. And there is actually a couple of units of Ironfoot Spears up here on the higher ground as well. Moving on to the Evil Men, we have a host from Umbar, played by Vox Hales. He has got some Balagaya pikemen here, so they'll be good for holding the superior forces of the elves and dwarves at bay, potentially, allowing some of their units to do the business as well. Umbar, though, are certainly no slouches when it comes to their infantry. You can see here the Balagaya footmen, who are certainly not the most damaging thing in the world, but they will help facilitate the line holding a little bit more. So Corsair infantry without the upgrades, but of course they can just poke and prod with their bows and then fill any gaps that show up because they are light infantry as well. Again, more cavalry. Ardenheim Lancers, Alcarondas Faithful. Is that 2 units of Alcarondas Faithful? I think that's incredibly wasteful if that's true. As Umbar, you don't really have any excuse for doing this either, because you do have 2 units of knights that you can potentially bring. You have your warlords and your Alcarondas Faithful, so I'm very surprised. It's definitely the mark of a newer player, that one. We've got some Balakith Marksmen again, good for skirmishing with the enemy. Alcarondas Legion are here as well, and that's pretty much that with Balagaya as well. So his ally, meanwhile, is sequestered in the hills up here. Manus Hudson 1, so that is a name that I do recognise, so I'd expect him to know what he's doing. He has got some Eastron Horse Guard again, more cav. Surprising amount of cav for this map, because rarely is it the deciding factor. We've got some Flagrim, so again some nice armour-piercing line infantry, a real hallmark of Rune's front line. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen with their specialty projectiles. Luk Scion Rim, there's some Carmels chosen in there as well, some Eastron crossbows, Scion Rim in there as well, and then some Nar Rim also. And this is probably going to be the first place where we actually see some action today, because we've got Dol Amroth played by Nikita. Again, in terms of melee, I would back Rune, especially given the position, to be honest with you, because the AP, Rune's infantry is okay, in the same way that Dol Amroth is, but the AP focus, I think, gives Rune the edge in a fight between the two. Standard Athalond Man-at-Arms without an armour upgrade as well, so they're going to be a little bit less impressive. The Athalond Halberdiers should do decently, and I think they actually do outperform the Gamp Rim, so we'll see how well they can do there. Some unupgraded Doranernal Archers, some Halberdiers as well, a couple of units of Men-at-Arms. The Haven Guard, to be fair, Rune don't really have an infantry unit that's on the level of the Haven Guard, but of course an army is more than just a single unit. And yet more cavalry, 2 units of Knights of the Silver Swan down here as well. And to round things off, I think we're going to probably see more cavalry, indeed we will, because it's the green and gold of Rohan. And they have got some Eastmark Spears, Eastmark Riders. It's interesting to see units like that. Blue Ranger playing as them. Riddermark Skirmishers could be useful against the Dwarves, to be fair. Got some Eastmark Spearmen there. What have we got here? Some Shield Maidens, a good choice. Westmark Infantry as well as the Westmark Spears, so the best front line that Rohan can really lay on. Helmingas, Helm's Hammers, a couple of units of Westmark Marshals, and then the mighty Mediceld Guard as well. Wait a second, I don't have the vegetation detail on highest. Sickening, but without further ado, let's begin. So, like I said, I think we could end up making a cut here. It kind of depends on what Dol Amroth and Rune decide to do, because it is going to be very much on Nikita to choose how they approach this. Again, I think there's some newer players just based on the fact that I don't recognise some names. In particular, I'm looking at Umbar and at Dol Amroth. And Dol Amroth may have just deployed up here because for the deployment zone this was the highest point for them, but in so doing they are still putting themselves at a big terrain disadvantage, to be honest with you, against a force that Dol Amroth probably won't like facing off against in melee anyway in Rune. The Gnar Rim, you would back them in a straight shooting contest against the Dorananal Archers. There are no Tirithea marksmen on display for Dol Amroth today, so they won't win that particular fight. It's not a good position for Dol Amroth to be in, to be honest with you. Rohan are probably also in the position they would like to be in the least, because they're down here on the lowest ground. And for Dol Amroth, or Rohan I should say, to equalise the infantry fight against many of these forces, elves and dwarves especially, but also Umbar, they'll want to have superior terrain to use stuff like their Shield Maidens and their Metacell Guard. If they have to march uphill into Elven Arrowfire, Dwarven Crossbows, Umbar Archers even, they're going to be in big, big trouble. Manus Hudson is going to start forming up with his Golden Horde. He's just getting himself into position. I mean, this is the prime real estate on this map, to be honest with you. It's the tallest peak. It's a nice position to defend. You have positions that you can actually fall back to. It's got very much like a siege mentality thing going on here. You can go all the way back up to here if you so desire. Honestly, if I were Dol Amroth, though, I'd probably move in quickly. I would have tried to sprint uphill as quickly as possible, though, to be honest with you. If I were Dol Amroth, I probably wouldn't have deployed up here in the first place. I've actually got more units down here that I completely missed, including Silver Swan Knights, 2 units of Catapult, Perithil Champions, more Archers. Again, though, I'm not sure about this, if I'm being honest. And we've got over here as well the Ardenheim Lancers. I think I will make a bit of a cut here because it's quite clear that the players at this point are sort of dancing around one another, and there probably is a grace period because the Archers are not opening up. So I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is underway. So here we go, the Gnar Rim opening up. Not a huge cut, kind of as I was expecting, because this is the sort of thing that you would like to see. But Dol Amroth are moving uphill, so credit to Nikita. He is going to get into the front line here. It's not going to go too well for him though. The Athalon Man-at-Arms are very much a workhorse kind of unit, as it is in Reforged, given the current balance and meta. They're getting shot into from the front, which they won't mind too much. Decently armoured, nice shield value from the front as well. Not entirely sure where these archers are going. They're just piling into melee from the front, a definite hallmark of a player that is very new to the game indeed. You need to be getting them further back. It could have been a misclick, but yeah, they're getting involved in melee, which is not where they want to be at all. Again, I said the Athalon Halberdiers are probably superior to the Gamp Rim, but Rune here have got superior terrain, they've got the better range support, and the Scion Rim make for a much better bulwark on the front line than the Athalon Man-at-Arms do, because the Scion Rim, not the most damaging unit, but very, very tanky. Some sort of electronic pump going on outside, which is a little bit strange, but yes. Balaketh Tribesmen, or Balkoth Tribesmen, also firing away with their javelins, which is going to do a lot of damage to Dol Amroth. I mean, at this point, I would cut your losses. It's not a good place to be in general. They're going to try and shoot uphill as well. The catapult's going to move forward, which probably they should have waited for the catapult to come up here, just generally. That would have been, I think, the better idea. See over here, a couple of units of Dwarven Spears forming up a multi-layered front line. Good at holding the line, but there's only 2 of them ultimately. Interesting to see what the elves and the dwarves actually do, because they've just formed up at the bottom of this hill. I don't think they quite know which way to go. Do they want to go down here on the low ground and try and tackle Rohan? Or do they want to go up here and try to tackle Umbar? Those are the 2 choices. Both of these 2 are separated from their allies as well, because obviously Rune and Dol Amroth are going at it, so they're not going to get much in the way of support. Although if I had to guess, I would actually say that Dol Amroth could get more help, purely because they've got those Silver Swan Knights, but Rohan are also in the process of actually moving through the valley as it is, so I mean, of the 2, you'd probably prefer to face Rohan if it comes to a pure infantry engagement, especially considering as though Umbar seems to be consolidating up here, confident in the fact perhaps that their runic allies can do the business up on this hill, which, speaking of which, this is still the situation as we see it. These strong crossbows can perhaps shoot at Rohan as they move over here. Not entirely sure how useful that's going to be though. So far, the one and only engagement that's happening, fire arrows zipping overhead, probably making a mockery of the Dorananal Archers. I mean, they're staying alive to a decent extent here. The Dorananals, they don't have the armour upgrade, but this is still pretty much what they're designed to do. Just sit there and shoot, not necessarily do a huge amount of damage, but occupy enemy skirmishers. The Gnar Rim are more capable of dishing out that damage. They don't really need to dish out that much damage on the front line at this point, because while Dol Amroth haven't been slaughtered in a completely one-sided fashion on this front line, it's definitely an engagement that Rune will be feeling far happier about than Dol Amroth. They've won the skirmish fight, and they are going to win the infantry fight as well. It would be interesting to see what happens down here though, because we don't really get to see these units are hidden from the Elven perspective, so we're just going to have to keep an eye out on that. We can't depend on the minimap this time, as we can see Rohan are here. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are going to be throwing their daggers. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are a solid unit in melee though, more so because they've got a ton of melee defense. They're going to be able to soften up the Westmark infantry on the approach as well. Perhaps 2 units will be enough to kill them off in their entirety. Cummel's Shadow Guard as well, who are potentially going to try and go around here to get into the back of Dol Amroth. At the very least, Rohan's presence here is not going to allow them to do that. So far though, good news all of this really for the elves and the dwarves, because they've stayed out of battles so far. Having said that, Umbar haven't really committed anything anywhere else, but it's probably looking the worst so far for the good men, because Rohan are in a position where it's going to be quite difficult. Rune are getting some good value against both Dol Amroth and Rohan, even if they end up losing this fight. Perhaps they can hedge their bets on their Umbaran allies to go on to win this particular fight. Again though, Westmark Infantry, they did take a downhill charge for the Shadow Guard. There's also the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen in here as well. I think the runic units are of higher quality, but the problem is, I mean, there's 2 units of Shadow Guard here. Nikita can come down with some support from his Peripheral champions. It's looking bad for this pocket of runic resistance. Scion Rim are there. Still not much of anything going on over here. Corsair Infantry potentially trying to take some pot shots. Yeah, they were. They killed off a few of the Woodland Protectors. There's also the March Wounds of the Wood. I mean, this is exactly the sort of thing you want to do with your Corsair Infantry. Just kill off a few with your limited ammo supply and then just use them as cannon fodder, really, on the front line, which is what they will certainly be against Erebor and against Lorien. Speaking of which, Lorien are pushing their way through the lower valley section here, and Rohan are going to keep moving away. Rohan can screen their retreat, of course, with their cavalry. Dol Amroth could potentially get involved with that as well. Actually, they're moving their cavalry off to the outer edge of the map. Don't get to see this portion of the map at all, really, because it's a bit of a dead end, but interesting to see it. Potentially used to sequester away the Dol Amroth cavalry. Interesting as well to see what looks to be arrows coming forth from Umbar up on the cliffs over there. And it is Balakith marksmen firing at the Eastmark spearmen. I don't really think there's any need for Umbar to necessarily do that, especially against Eastmark spears. Those Balakiths could be so useful at trying to counteract the Elven archers, which they will inevitably have to face from Lorien. These javelins, low damage javelins, but they're going to try and do business against the Gamperin. Meanwhile, I don't think, Dol Amroth didn't really learn their lesson here. They're just going to drip feed in units over here. So Rune has had a good start to this game so far in terms of efficiency, although I think that has more to do with inexperience on the part of Dol Amroth more so than anything else. The Scion Rim and the Gamperin, still the same units holding the line, and they're going to be able to sucker in a unit of dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan as well, which are an important unit for Dol Amroth because an excellent supporting tool. They make for a hard centre to the Dol Amroth lines because of their multiple HP and nature. Statistically, there are more impressive infantry units that have 2 HP, but even so, that second hit points makes them just a really nice bulwark, and they're getting picked apart here, unfortunately, by the armour piercing of the halberds and soon the armour piercing of the Balkoth. Back down there, still the Doranernal archers trying to make something happen as well. To be fair, most of this runic front line has been expended, but in terms of the trade, Rune will be much happier with what has transpired here. Meanwhile, still this Rohirric fight goes on over here as well. Meanwhile, you can see over here these Helmingars from Blue Ranger. I don't know whether he forgot them or whether he was hoping to keep them hidden and then perhaps shoot any stragglers from the elves in the back. It's all a bit of a moot point now though, because they're going to get charged into oblivion by the Loranand Mounted Company. Meanwhile, Riddermark Skirmishers and Eastmark Riders retreating further back down over here. More of them Eastmark Spearmen turning around as the main body of the Lothlorien army, by the looks of things, is over here. I'll say that Lorien are fairly well spread out, actually, the dwarves and the elves, supporting one another, but still, they're not really doing a whole lot. And Umbar are going to probably continue to use their ammunition onto Rohan, so again, in a free-for-all, if your opponents start just dumping all of their resources into other fights and not focusing on you, it speaks well for you in the late game, to be honest, especially when you're talking about Erebor and Lothlorien. they should really be public enemy number one in this game, because that combination of factions in terms of the quality they can offer in the late game is a massive problem potentially for everyone else. But we shall see if that comes into play later on. Politics are a free-for-all, as we often see. Thalon's men-at-arms taking some damage, some Dorananal archers moving forward. So Dol Amroth finally pushing back against Rune just a little bit, but of course the main event here in many ways for the runic player is going to be their skirmishers. Again, a nice volley in there from the crossbows as well. Another wave of men from Dol Amroth falls by the wayside. You can see there in the background as well, Rohan getting awfully close by the looks of things to the war goats, which you don't want to be there. I mean, Eastmark Riders, you rarely see them for good reason. Sort of the upper mid-tier of cavalry rarely gets used. The lower end of cavalry is next to useless, I would say, which is a problem for someone like Rohan who wants to be that cavalry horde, but that's really a different matter. On this occasion, Eastmark Riders want to be nowhere near the war goats and the Lothlorien cavalry, even more so with the Lothlorien cavalry really. Bit of a mess though down here. Rohan are probably a little bit concerned because it's probably getting a little bit claustrophobic for them. They've got their allies, they're probably going to want to go up this way because they have managed to get rid of this pocket of runic resistance, which, you know, this fight didn't go very well for Rune, and the units down here were actually more expensive, so it probably does actually even itself out to just being an average performance so far for Rune, more so because of the position that they took up. But if I were Rohan, I'd be getting my entire force up here at this point. It's the best place for you to be. Riddermark skirmishers coming in. They're going to try and go after the Lorinand mounted company, or at least zone them out. I mean, the Riddermarks are melee cavalry, but the Lorinand cavalry has got really high melee defense because of them being elves. But it's, again, numbers are pushing them back. If the war goats were closer, that would have not been great. You could also say the same about the Riders of the Golden Wood, to be honest with you. There's still spears back here. I like the way that Rohan has done this, to be honest with you. It's been a difficult transition from over here to over here. Eastron Horse Guard charging in there as well. There's a lot that he has to look after here, but he needs to get all of his infantry up, I think, alongside his ally, because otherwise it's not going to go that well for him. A nice charge there from the Eastron Horse Guard as well. There's not many of these Eastmark Spearmen left at this stage. Westmark infantry need to be getting out of there as well, because they're going to get charged into oblivion if they're not careful. Still not entirely sure where the Umbar cavalry went to. They're still just waiting here up again. 2 units of Alcarondas Faithful is a perplexing decision, to be honest with you. I'm still a little bit surprised, honestly, that Lorien and Erebor haven't tried their luck against this Umbar army, because, to be honest, the infantry quality is not so much there. And with the dwarves as your solid centre and the elves as your damage dealers, I don't think Umbar would be able to stop a concerted push, even with quite a few of the units down here. But this is quite a lot of the Lothlorien lower end units, to be honest. So I'm a little bit surprised that they're being so cautious, because they could be really on the front foot here, and that would put the Evil Men alliance under a bit more pressure, to be honest with you, because now I think Manus Hudson is maybe making a bit of a hash of the early gains that he made, if I'm being honest, because now, while he did well initially, he's throwing his out-of-ammo skirmishers under the bus a little bit, and they're not going to do very well against a concerted push like this from Dol Amroth. So credit for Dol Amroth to not getting disheartened and continuing to push, because it does mean that they have actually fought their way back into, you know, a fairly even trade. Especially if you can get into those Eastron crossbows. It's going to be difficult, I think. Those men-at-arms will probably cop a volley before then. But again, the terrain around here is actually making it a little bit difficult for the Flagrim to respond quickly, perhaps. And this could all be good news for Dol Amroth. Of course, all of this is still good news for the elves and the dwarves. This Athalon men-at-arms unit will probably get cleaned up relatively quickly, considering there's Flagrim on station. It all rather depends on if the Narrim can hold the Knights of the Silver Swan at bay. Dorananal archers moving forward, more halberds, more men-at-arms, so Dol Amroth pushing forward more, which is good to see. Again, it's not been like a spotless performance from Dol Amroth by any means, but he hasn't collapsed in the way that sometimes newer players can be seen to do, by just not committing anything and going back into their shell, or just committing everything and allowing the enemy to shoot into them with reckless abandon. Marchborns of the Wood moving forward, potentially going to try and get some shots off into what, I wonder. Balagaya Pikes wouldn't be the worst idea. Down here we can still see the Lorinand Mounted Company charging around. There's 1 men-at-arms. There's now 0 men-at-arms. All of this cavalry. probably not going to see much use later on. If I were, honestly, Lorien and Erebor, I'd be committing my cavalry really quite aggressively into Rohan, because the longer the match goes on, to be honest, the cavalry is going to become less important. And while the Alcarondas faithful might worry you, as long as the battle is taking place on the cliffs, in the narrower areas, the Alcarondas faithful are not going to be that useful. Especially not when you consider the anti-cavalry capabilities that they've both got, spears and crossbows. Shouldn't be worrying him too much. I like this from Dol Amroth though, continuing to push forward. Halberdiers are on the front line now. Very depleted Perithil champions coming in as well. Obviously the Flagren taking a lot of damage. He's also going after the crossbows with his archers, a good choice because they're pretty lightly armoured. Taking some good shots into the Athalon men-at-arms, so they probably have done quite a lot of damage. Still, Rune and Dol Amroth fighting off against one another, and Rune probably has still had the better end of this engagement, to be honest. I just like the way that Dol Amroth hasn't crumbled in the face of a difficult situation. Umbar have got most of their archers over here, still firing into primarily Rohan, you would have to say. Still that Dol Amroth catapult as well. Helmingas firing in still. Two human alliances focusing on one another, allowing the elves and dwarves essentially to do nothing and just bide them their time and marshal their strength, which is never going to be that good of an idea if you ask me. Helmingas though, what are they actually going after? This should be a shield covered front line, should it not? And it is. Scion Rim, perhaps the best of the runic units for filling this role. Heavy golden plate and scales, and big shields as well. I think we might be seeing the beginnings of a push now up here, potentially. Well, whatever that was, I think that may very well have been... It's got the hallmarks of javelins about it, to be honest, that. Whatever it was, I mean, the elves paid the price for just pussyfooting around the issue, to be honest with you. They just sort of stood there, standoffish against Umbar, when they could wipe this away, they really could. They could claim the high ground, they could get their skirmishers into a position on this cliff and shoot into whatever's left down in the basin of this area over here. So I'm really quite surprised, honestly, at how passive the elves and dwarves are actually being here. They should be moving in for me. Meanwhile, Dol Amroth catapult firing in here. Perhaps they want to clear a path through this runic front line, but you're not really going to get that with the catapult, I don't think. You may score a few decent hits, but you're not going to get the full Monty that the catapult can do. Nice hit there right into the centre of the line. Like I said, a catapult, you really want to be getting them uphill of like a grindy fight if you can, because that's where it can really get super value. Shield maidens are moving forward, so now Rohan are up here, and this is where Rune will start to sweat quite a lot, I think, because now it's not just Dol Amroth having to contend with an uphill battle. Now it's an overwhelming force in which Dol Amroth have been joined by the Rohirric infantry, especially considering the amount of AP that Rohan have. The Dragon's Wrath units and the Loke units that may still be up here are going to get cleaned up pretty quickly, you'd imagine, especially considering Rohan are leading the way with Helm's Hammers and Westmark Marshals. A concern for them, to be sure. And those crossbows are going to get dealt with. Dragon's Wrath crossbows are in a good position to get some, well, I say that their own units are in the way, which is often a problem for crossbows. They're having to sort of bank their shots. Some of those shots hit very, very nicely into the shield maids and causes them to become shaken immediately, but the others are having to go over their own guildsmen. And as soon as the guildsmen are out of the way, of course, that means within seconds the Rohirric attack will be upon the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. The cavalry moving forward again. I'm not sure about this one. I mean, they've got their Ironfoot spears into a shield wall formation, holding the line. This isn't going to do all that much. They will kill off a few. It's a lot, actually. Again, the relative power spikes that knights offer in the game at the minute is a little bit much, perhaps. But that could be one of the things which is looked at in the sort of drastic rebalancing that will probably be coming to Reforged at some stage, considering Rangers will be neutered as well. It could bring about a very different meta for the game, which I'm actually quite looking forward to at this stage. Still Lorien and Erebor just allowed to sit there, Dol Amroth and Rohan just staring back at them. Really the only place where there's any genuine action happening at this point on the field is the now Rohan-led push, you'd have to say, but having said that, lots of damage being done, primarily at range, you would have to say. Those Dragon's Wrath crossbows are actually, even though they're banking the shots, because of the terrain, it's one of those rare occasions where the crossbows having to bank their shots is actually working out quite nicely for them. We'll see if that continues, because personally I have my doubts. And of course that is a tool that later they will not be able to use, and it does look as though they have now run their ammunition supply dry, so they're pulling out their large two-handed waved swords, and they're actually going to get into melee as well. They're good in melee, very good. But I question the logic of committing yet more units over here. There's still the Khamul's Chosen here as well, who should probably be thinking about leaving, to be honest with you. March Warns of the Wood coming forward, a mistake however, you would have to say, as the Alcarondas faithful move forward again. Perhaps a good opportunity there to keep going. I mean, it was Spears of the Wood, I guess. Again, Umbar now getting their archers back into position, no longer down on the low ground, and now kind of depends on what they're shooting at, to be honest, as to whether this will be worthwhile. They're going to hit a few things back here. The March Wardens and the Woodman Protectors, you'll do a decent amount of damage against them. Not so much against Ironfoot Spears in a shield wall formation. That's where the dwarves are, of course, at their strongest. Just to give some perspective on when this replay is actually happening as well, I put up a poll for my next DAC campaign between Erebor and Gundabad, and Erebor are fairly comfortably in the lead, so by this point in time we could already be a fair ways into an Erebor campaign in Divide and Conquer. So might get used to the dwarven aesthetic. There's still 15 Helmshammers in this little nook up here. Yeah, it's looking a little bit worse for Rune at this point. There's not huge amounts of quality on the front line, but they will be overwhelmed eventually, and they're going to get some support as well from some basic archers. It's only a matter of time, I think, before Rune have to accept the fact that they're going to get pushed back here by Dol Amroth and Rohan. Meanwhile, what is happening over here? This is a bold move from Dol Amroth and Rohan. I like it, honestly. I do like this. The fact that they're willing to take a risk and go forward. Westmark Spearmen are coming forward. Helmingas, Eastmark Spears are throwing some javelins in to the dwarven front line. Not the highest damage javelins by any means, but they'll still do a bit of damage. I don't know whether this will be effective, to be honest with you, because again, just based on the meta of Reforged being what it is, considering the calibre of units that they're sending forward to do this offensive action, it probably won't be. But I like the fact that they're attempting something like this, because so far in the fight no one has really looked at Erebor and Lothlorien and thought, maybe we should start doing a little bit more damage to them rather than each other. And that's the downfall of so many losing teams in a free-for-all. It's because they get tunnel vision fighting the opponent they're up against, and they don't really pay much attention to a team which is playing by a system, essentially. And now they might be allowing the opposing cavalry to come in as well. So it started off quite well, but now they've allowed their infantry to be out in no man's land here. I'm actually quite surprised again that those Golden Riders didn't come forward to try and charge down the Helmingas in particular, because you won't really take too much damage in return. Meanwhile, Dorananal Archers in position now. There are actually some more Flag Grim over here, which is pretty decent for shoring up the line, but also something else that's been added in are some Westmark Marshals, and their armour piercing will really help. But of course, those arrows are going to be something else which really does chip damage over time. The shield value is coming into effect though for Rune, for the units that do have a shield value. Looks like we have Signs of Life over here, as the elves do crawl their way into position. Interesting to see what the Alcarondas Faithful do. If he was paying attention, he actually got quite a lot of damage done to those Ironfoot Spears, even though they were braced and everything. So perhaps, you know, again, like the Spears of the Wood are more fragile as well because of that. Well, I say that melee defense from the front means they should actually mitigate more of that charge damage, to be honest. I wonder what would be more effective against a unit of non-AP charging cavalry. Having the high armour of the Ironfoots or the high melee defense of the Spears of the Wood. Against the Lance unit would definitely be the Spears of the Wood, because the AP means the heavy armour of the Ironfoot Spears is not going to be all that effective. Still not that much happening over here. There is a bit of high ground, but they don't really have anything that can make any use of it at this stage. Nice, the Silver Swan is sturdy cavalry, but not on the level of something like the Riders of the Goldenwood. There's nothing that scary down here. The crossbows are probably the scariest thing down here now, to be honest, now that most of the Silverthorns have been utilised. The catapult is still a significant addition to the armies that are on the map. Medicel Guard are in an ideal position to just tear this runic front line asunder, because they're still doing a good job at this point. Rune have probably racked up a good kill count for themselves, because it still rates their chances quite highly on the front line, mainly because I think of that AP, and the Dragon's Wrath crossbows are really good in melee. Also, quite a lot of the units they've been facing off against have been out of ammunition Doranonal archers, which don't really offer too much in terms of melee prowess. Certainly not. But still, do you really want to be using up more of your valuable ammunition on Rune? Rune have just gotten into a shape and have withstood pressure, so they've done it well. Even so, I don't really think that his team are in like a particularly fantastic position to go on to win, to be honest with you. Just because, like, if I look at Umbar and I think they're siphoning off units continuously from this front line. The time is now. The time is now for Lorien and Erebor to come forward and try and envelop and crush Umbar for me. Because the more units they send across to potentially help Rune, the easier it should be for you to just roll forward with your heavy Dwarven units, the Elven units as well in support, and you should just be able to just crush them, really. Soften them up with the Javelins first as well. Look at those Balagar pikes fall under the weight of those Elven Jabbies. It's not looking good for them at all at this point, really, is it? They're going to have to waddle away unceremoniously. Damage being done. Scion Rim moving up there, so actually going to go in from behind as well. I mean, a large proportion of the Rohirric and Dolan Rothian army at this point is over here, and to be fair, they've left the catapult behind. If they don't get a move on, they're actually going to get intercepted by those Scion Rim. And that would be a real tragedy, because that's really their only hope at getting a result here. They're going to turn around and potentially get some defenders down there, which that'll be enough. Haven Guard, Halberdiers, but they could need them on the front line if I'm being honest. Ardenium Lancers are up here. Still, that runic front line has really done the business, you have to say. The quality has been key here. Rohan may have some high damage units, but Rune have had the better frontline composition. Doranonal archers were never really going to be up to all that much. Finally, we have a general advance ordered by Lothlorien and Erebor, and they are going to get in here. Mostly Balagar units on the front line as well, who will hold the line initially, but ultimately you'd have to expect that the quality coming from the Elder races here would be far, far too much for the beleaguered Umbar forces. You can see some of the out of ammunition archers as well with their smaller shields, their bucklers, and their short swords. So they're going to be here trying to do their thing as well. More footmen, more archers, just the full Balagar experience. Alcarondas Legion is much more like it, to be fair. They will do a significantly better job, but with stuff like Axe Guard, even they are probably going to not enjoy being on the front line. They'll definitely take damage. And then there's, of course, the reinforcements and the range support that can be offered by the elves. Mostly the elves as well. It's pretty much entirely a dwarven force here, just preventing any sort of flank, although it's not really the most devastating flanking force, if we're being honest. Lighter cavalry. Well, these Scion Rim, they have been taking charges from the Knights of the Silver Swan, but the Silver Swans need to get out of there quickly because they are heavy spears. You can see they're already taking effect. Like higher end lancers that don't have that second hit point in Reforged do tend to be overly fragile, I would say. But they do charge well when they get their lancers down, which on this occasion they don't. A problem which tends to plague Dol Amroth more so than most others. Two very similar units actually, the Knights of the Silver Swan and the Ardenium Lancers. The difference being the Ardenium Lancers are charging downhill, or at least moving downhill, and they've got the backup of the Alcarondas Faithful, who will massacre Knights of the Silver Swan. That's where the power of a unit of knights will really come to bear. I really question the bringing of two of that unit, but no matter. Umbar's infantry force is going to struggle, I would imagine. They're going to start getting pushed back here as they manage to save a few of their units, but you would definitely say at this point in proceedings it's looking pretty good for the elves and the dwarves in terms of going on to win. There was a gap in the side of the line as well, so Marchwarns of the Wood getting in behind the line. Even if they don't get into a position where they can shoot, Umbar are going to have to siphon off an infantry unit to get them to not shoot into their back, and if that proves to be a unit of Alcarondas Legion, it will just hasten the demise of this Umbar front line under the weight of an Elven and Dwarven assault. Yeah, and they're going to have to, because if they get shot in the back by those March Wardens, it is genuinely all over for them even more quickly. And they won't even be able to do that little bit of extra damage against the Dwarves and Umbar they would otherwise be able to do. They're fighting reasonably evenly at this stage. Alcarondas Legion getting bounced back and forth between the March Wardens, but it's the reinforcements. They've still got Blades of the Wood that can be committed forward. relatively easily. Again, I'm really perplexed at what the elves are doing there. You can't pull the spears off the front line, you need weights here. If you turn your back on Umbar, they will start to do chip damage to you. Umbar maybe as well, their micro is taken up, their ability to micro anyway, taken up by this over here as the dwarves continue to shimmy backwards, which will of course allow Rohan to get their cavalry and their infantry across the field, but they do have to contend with the minefield that is going up against the Umbar cavalry, Ardenheim Lancers, Riddermark skirmishers. There's more of the Ardenheim Lancers. I mean, with this, the good cavalry should clean up the Lancers. Don't know where the Alcarondas faithful went. But whatever happened to that catapult, still waiting. Don't know who that was. It's not looking good over here though, with the Umbar forces transitioned across from the other side of the map, most of it out of ammo skirmishers in Corsair Infantry and Balakats. Yeah, there goes the Umbar general. Yeah, the forward momentum here definitely in favour of the elves and the dwarves. There's another general abandoning their men as well. I don't know who that would be. It's not Dol Amroth. It might... no, it's not Rune either. Rune's general should be over here. Is it Dol Amroth then? Because I can't imagine that he had his general in a unit of cavalry like this, did he? Or was it the Rohirric? No, I don't think so. Well, anyway. That Lothlorien cavalry is still buzzing around. Rohan infantry, so I mean, technically speaking, the forces of good men have got the low ground in the middle of the mountain passes. But yeah, Umbar. I think at this point I would bet a substantial amount on the elves and dwarves winning, and this should just be a cautionary tale, really, that in a free-for-all you need to keep your eyes open, otherwise this is the sort of thing that can happen. The forces of evil men and the forces of good men were beating 7 bells out of one another, allowing the elves and the dwarves to just sit there basically and take it all in and play the battle at their leisure basically. They were able to get themselves into a perfect, nice little neat formation, slowly walking their men into it and then advancing. It should never be that comfortable for a force to do that. You should always be trying to make your opponent feel uncomfortable. That is the Runic general. So Rune and Umbar losing their generals. It's not looking that great for them either, even if they do occupy the prime real estate on the map with that peak in the background. I don't think any sort of strength is going to prevent them. I mean, at this stage, you need to be talking to one another in the group chat like, listen, we need to pull back from one another, we need to stop killing each other, and we need to join forces. We need to stop the Elven and Dwarven menace, but newer players rarely do that because they tend to, again, like I said, tunnel vision, just choose your engagement and then fight to the bitter end in it. And it's not going to work for them. It's not going to work for them at all on this occasion. Unfortunately for them. Over here, Erebor. Still Riders of the Golden Wood, making sure that there really is no escape for any of these units over here. And that is going to be that. Dol Amroth charging up this big hill over here. Dol Amroth are now pulling back. I would really question if Foxhails chases Dol Amroth down. It may be that they have actually spoken in the group chat at this point. It definitely has that feel, doesn't it? Better late than never, but I don't think they've got enough at this point. Dol Amroth is looking depleted. Rohan is looking even more depleted, amazingly enough. The catapult is really their hope. If they can draw the elves and the dwarves into an engagement which is not favourable for them, then they may be in business. However, with this, I mean, they're still not fully trustworthy of one another, are they? Because they've got a unit of Balagai footmen over here. I mean, I think at this point a betrayal from either of the two human alliances would be remarkably foolish. Regardless, I'll make another cut here because chances are it will take the elves and the dwarves a little while. They'll probably take their time getting into a position to attack. But I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is joined once more. And we rejoin proceedings once again with looking like... I mean, the one thing I will say for the elves and dwarves that they've done certainly better than the other two teams today is they've moved as a unit much better. Umbar and Rune were disparate from one another. Dol Amroth and Rohan initially were disparate from one another, although they did make efforts to join up with one another as quickly as they possibly could. The elves and the dwarves have combined better throughout, I would say, overall. And they may very well end up doing that again here, as the elves are going to lead the way into the Rohirric front line, I think, with their woodland units first of all. The grey palette to blend in with the Malorn trees that they are known for. A lot of Blades of the Wood, which should do quite nicely actually against the Rohirrim units. The Westmarks here looking to hold the line. I think that's actually Helmingas in behind them, indeed it is. They've got some halberds. Yeah, the catapult has to be the thing to do the business, and Dol Amroth needs to get their catapult into the best possible position. I don't know whether they've forgotten about it or what. Saving it at this point is a complete waste of time. What they're going to do here, they're going to throw those Doranernal archers under the bus as they try to retreat some of their units. I mean, they're turning their backs on this force, which means any unshielded, well, any shielded units are going to lose that shield value. Meaning they're going to take that much more damage. Yeah, they're going to use like depleted units essentially to try and. It's not really going to achieve all that much though, because these Spears of the Wood weren't moving anyway. So all they're really going to do is throw these Doranernal archers under the bus as those poison trails whistle overhead. Can't imagine these archers are going to last that much longer. And indeed they rout very, very quickly, as you would expect. Lorien should now be able to move forward, but yeah, they're getting into a defensive shape here. I mean, this is a worry for Erebor and Lorien. They do need to move quickly to a certain extent, because otherwise they're going to find themselves going up against an impregnable defence. And Lorien and Erebor can have no complaints about how both human teams are basically approaching this battle at this point, because they sat back for a long time and basically reaped the rewards of the lack of awareness from the opposing teams. Now, however, that they have gained their awareness back, they can't cry foul play when they get into a nice defensive shape. Meanwhile, those Ironfoot Wargoats, I mean, this is a situation where the Ironfoot Wargoats won't do very well at all. The Hammer Guard would be an interesting matchup against the Alcarondas Faithful, but this is perhaps where that Umbar melee cavalry can actually really earn its keep. As Ironfoot Wargoats taking a ton of damage here at the hands of the melee knights. This is a nasty position. They need to get that catapult into position probably about... Yeah, they need to just sort of line it up really with... Yeah, here would be the best place, because then you can shoot through the hill as they move up it. Lothlorien probably not thrilled about the prospect of having to go up this way, but they have no choice at this stage. Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, 2 Athalorn Man-at-Arms, so these are just going to get in the way, I suppose. Could the cavalry move through? I doubt it. There are halberdiers there. In Divide and Conquer, cavalry, high-tier cavalry, can actually take a remarkable beating against anti-cavalry units, but in Reforged that is not the case. They'll drop like flies to halberdiers, even the very finest cavalry. Alcarondas Faithful is going to start charging downhill, potentially. I mean, they're definitely going to make life more uncomfortable for the dwarves of Erebor. I don't know whether it's going to really be enough. I mean, Erebor should have the necessary spears to do the business. And like I said, the whole defence at this point hinges on if the catapult can be utilised to good effect. If it just comes down to martial might, I don't think the human kingdoms have got enough left. The announcer, it takes something for the announcer to say the battle seems to be swinging in our favour in a free-for-all, when the end of the battle is not really that close. So it goes to show really how much of a lead the elves and the dwarves have managed to build up. The dwarves look to be taking the lead on this side over here, so they're going to be going after primarily the evil men force. I think that's because they have a better, or they have more spears left standing to be able to zone out the Alcarondas Faithful. Whereas the elves do not. They do still have some spears of the wood perhaps, but most of their units will be more at home trying to rip and tear their way through the front lines that we can see here. They're going to try and skirmish first, because halberdiers are going to move out the way. It's a risky proposition that, because if the elven cavalry went on a kamikaze mission, they could try and snipe out the cavalry if that was the way they were going to try and handle matters. The clonk of an arrow on wood as it slams into the catapult. Eastmark spears are here, yeah, like the quality is... The Medicel Guard will do okay, but I just don't rate Rohan's chances here at all well. I really don't know what Dol Amroth are doing with that catapult. Even if they don't intend to use it down here, they should just move it back. If they do intend to use it down here, they should get it into position now. Medieval 2 artillery is legendarily unresponsive when you move it. It's very slow, very clunky, but very powerful as well. Meanwhile, the dwarves crawling their way up this hill. Lothlorien and Erebor have certainly taken their time in this battle so far. I think it's certainly more understandable from Lorien's. I mean, if I were Lorien, I'd be getting up this hill as quickly as I possibly could. I'd be charging all my infantry up here because the catapult just isn't in position, and that's really the only problem you have. If you charge up with all your infantry, Lorenar and Axemen, Spears of the Wood, everything, they won't stop you. At that point, your only main concern is if the Metacell Guard can do a decent amount of damage, but they've still got javelins, so even then, you want to get them into melee quickly, because while they'll do a lot of damage there, you don't want them to use javelins against you. And again, it just speaks to a lack of organisational skills, really. There are some Woodland Protectors on the way up here as well. I mean, again, I'm really surprised at how slow Lorien and Erebor have been in moments in this battle where really they could have gotten away with being much quicker. Much quicker. And now the catapult crew looks to be shimmying around a little bit, but it's going to be far too late, and that's really disappointing though. What is this? What's going on? It's so sloppy from everyone. Lorien cowardice, really. The fact that they got to the top of the hill, had an opportunity to engage with multiple targets which you want to shut down, and then they decided not to. They went back into their shell and decided to sit there. That's disappointing. They're just fortunate in many ways that Dol Amroth are making the bigger mistake by doing nothing with their catapult. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I can't really commend any team in this battle so far, really. The closest I could come to commending a player, I think, would be Rune. A nice downhill charge into the Ironfoot Warriors there. Umbar have done pretty well with their cavalry. I think their army organisation and composition was highly suspect, but they did okay. Cavalry has done a good job against the dwarves. It's pretty much the only thing to have done any damage to the dwarven army at this point in time, to be honest with you. But everyone else has been quite slow, quite lethargic, mistakes creeping in. You'd expect it from newer players. Some others, however, I'd expect a little bit better from. Yeah, I think Rune has been the closest thing to an MVP in this battle so far, because they have actually been under pressure and they've responded to it in the way that you would expect. Nothing like 5D chess-esque from them by any means, but they've done okay. Yeah, again, like this is the sort of thing that should have happened a little bit earlier on, to be honest with you. There's Lorenar. Is there Lorenar and Axemen? Where's the elites? They need to get their elites in here. Halberdiers are going to try and lock off the situation. Finally, they managed to get in here. This is what should have happened a moment ago, and when it didn't, Dol Amroth should have moved their catapult. I have no idea why they've just kept it here facing the wall. That's been really a cardinal sin, but I'm more willing to forgive that because I've never seen this player's name before, so I would assume a substantially newer player. Blue Ranger I've seen a couple of times before, but again, there's not really much he could have done other than try and lock off the catapult, or maybe tell his ally to move it. Alas. The dwarves still being given the runaround by the cavalry over here. Dol Amroth's cavalry joining in on the fun with a nice downhill charge into the back as well. That's going to be really devastating because the melee defense value being taken out of the equation there. Alcarondas Faithful doing a really good job, I have to say. They are ultimately going to fall by the wayside, and because of how little damage the Dwarven host had taken up till this point, it's not going to be decisive by any means. But at least they're having their moment in the sun here. There's still Obsidian Guard and Highborns, which I do not believe they're going to have the they're not going to have the minerals to turn them back. I mean, the Carnival's Chosen are okay, but that's really the limit of what they are. They're just okay. As a bodyguard unit, they're far better in the game. Yeah, and here are the elves. This is more what I was expecting of earlier, because with stuff like Lorenar and Axemen on the front line, they're going to start tearing through these basic Rohirrim units. Armour piercing not really a requirement to do really nicely against Rohan in melee. So the really high base damage of the Lorien infantry here is going to do the business. Dol Amroth are trying to shut the door again with some more Athalon men-at-arms, but that isn't going to be enough either. The martial might of the elves. It's going to be too great here. It's going to be too great. We got back there. Riddermarks. Riddermark skirmishers. Still alive. Which, considering the calibre of cavalry on the field today, is quite interesting, really. Usually they're a throw your javelins and then sacrifice them to superior cavalry and do a bit of damage on the way down. They're one of the few units of regular cavalry, actually. Well, I say that, like, most javelin, cavalry and horse archers don't necessarily need to be the highest tier to actually be useful in Reforged in the current meta. Medicel Guard trying their best. In terms of quality, they actually do outperform most units on the field today, so that's interesting. Most units that are left anyway on that side of things, because Lorien didn't really bring their Carascaladon's pikemen, which would be better. The dwarves, on the other hand, have got their high tier infantry. They've still got crossbow ammunition as well. They'll be able to chase off the evil men cavalry. What are the Ironfoots doing? Most of these bolts are probably going right into the dirt in front of them, if I'm being honest. Oh well. What's going on back here? Again, it's not going to be enough, is it, to be honest? I think even more so than the good men, the evil men took a real savaging because they were having to stretch themselves and they were under the most pressure throughout the game. So, again, I do give a lot of credit to the Runic player in particular for, you know, making the best of the situation as they were put under constant pressure. Umbar did good with their cavalry. I think they probably should have retreated from this area far sooner, to be honest with you, given how slow Lorien and Erebor were to actually engage in many cases in this battle. I think it would have been the better choice. But in the end they decided to try and hold their ground with mostly a more basic Umbar infantry force, and I think a lot of that comes down to going into the red limit on the Alcarondas Faithful. Too reliant on stuff like Balagaya footmen and archers, when what they really would have wanted is going to be more sort of Balaketh axemen to deal with the dwarves. Perhaps some shield bearers, just the Balaketh units in general, and perhaps some high tier infantry as well. The Narun Aru, Harbingers of Castamere would have been useful against the elves. To see none of those units for Umbar's infantry wrecking ball, as we usually see, is quite surprising. Dol Amroth, however, joining the Medicel Guard on the front line now, and the Haven Guard doing their best, but again, it's too little too late at this point. The elves simply have too many numbers, and when the elves have got a numbers advantage against you, you know things are starting to go slightly pear-shaped for you, to put it mildly. Up here at the top of the hill, some more Balakeths, some Scion Rim. Ironfoot warriors trudging their way into position as well. It is a glacial pace at which the elves and Erebor, the elves and Erebor have gone about their business on this occasion, but it's a glacial pace that has been facilitated really by the other teams on the field today. Based on how it's gone. You can't really blame Lothlorien and Erebor for playing the game in the way that they have. I think even then though, like, against opposition that's a little bit more experienced in the game, shall we say, Erebor and Lorien could very well have been punished quite dearly for being so slow. So that is something, like, the takeaway from this battle for them shouldn't be, oh man, that really overly careful approach really served us well. It should be the sort of thing we do every time. It's only the sort of thing you can get away with if you're the one that's being left alone in the early stages of a free-for-all, and you are then continued to be left alone. Most more experienced teams will not allow you to do that, or at the very least, when the time comes to sort of unite against you, as to be fair the human alliances did on this occasion, they'll execute that a little bit better. They'll use the catapult well, they'll set up good positions and chokes, that sort of thing. Good javelins though. This will hasten the demise of Dol Amroth here on this front line, and then they're going to really, I wonder if they'll manage to catch Imrahil with these javelins here. Not so much actually, not so much. They're going to turn around the Haven Guard and get into melee with the Woodland Protectors. Again, the numbers situation here is looking rather grim at this juncture. What have we got going on back here? Finally the dwarves are moving in. I know the dwarves are not renowned for speed, but it's about bloody time that Erebor started doing something on this front line. Back there we've got there were some missiles coming in, maybe they've run out already. This is a little bit questionable, just leaving the Cardinals Chosen alone to try and hold back the Dwarven Horde. It's not going to make that much of a difference, to be fair to Ruud at this point. The battle for the Evil Men was lost actually a long time ago, because they were left with not that much, they were left with scraps really. If the good men and evil men had continued to try and batter against one another at the top of this hill, then Dol Amroth and Rohan would have been victorious overall. A big part of that is Umbar's main army, Balagai units of course being swallowed by the elves and the dwarves. If that had not been the case, it probably would have been the other way around. Riders of the Goldenwood doing their thing, Watchers of the Goldenwood still with ammunition. It just goes to show how comfortable really it has been. for the elder races. Trying to get into a position to really do the business. You can see how just tough the Haven Guard are. The fact they're still standing, showing no signs of folding quickly. Woodland Protectors. Are they going to throw? They are. I mean, this will make them drop much more quickly if they're taking arrows and javelins to the back. So who's going to fall first? I mean, it will be the good men, won't it? Because, again, the evil men have had the pleasure of having to, again, like, what is this? I'm sorry, but no. No. He's trying to charge in and out by the looks of things, but when you've got units sort of clogging things up on the front line, I think maybe he was just force passing all of his units through. So actually, I know what happened there. I thought for a second he was trying to pull back and then charge back in with his own units in the way, which would not have worked at all. You may as well just leave them in melee at this point, though. You're in close enough quarters at this point that your Axeman are going to rip the Gamprim apart. And we are very much into the dying embers of this fight. The elves and the dwarves, they're a scary duo to face when they put aside their differences to ally with one another, because their strengths complement one another so well. It is just Imrahil left down here at this stage. Surrounded on all sides by elven spearmen and axemen. He has elven blood as well, let's not forget, Imrahil. But I don't know if this would count as a kinslaying, perhaps a half kinslaying on this occasion. A semi-kinslaying, if you will. Anyway. So yeah, the good men are the first ones to fall. The evil men second. And the victors will be the elves and the dwarves. But like I said, I think a big part in that, they just did their job, the elves and the dwarves. But they were allowed to, really, if we're being honest, by their opponents. But that's kind of what you expect, really, from newer players, perhaps. Again, I would be... It's not the sort of thing that I would recommend you do a whole lot of. And that is going to be that. Or actually... Perhaps not. The evil men, I think, actually finished last, because I believe... No, Imrahil has died. So what's left then? There's nothing left, is there? Could be the Umbar Cavalry, actually. Which would, of course, mean... Yeah, it is. So yeah, the evil men do finish second. I think he's just allowing them to be intercepted now by spears and crossbowmen. And that will be that. And there's not really much else to add, really. Elves and the dwarves, they did their job. They were allowed to play the game in the way that they wanted. And so, of course, they ended up winning. But I think a lot of the plays in this game can just come down to inexperience. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. So, yeah. That is the end. I won't say thank you to Warlord as such, because he didn't send me this replay. I don't even know if he wanted this one shown, to be brutally honest, but... Such is the way of things at the moment, with more limited replays to go round, that I just nabbed it. So yeah, I'll say thank you for posting up the replay wherever it was. Probably the DF Discord, but at this point I really genuinely can't remember. And big thanks to all of the other players as well as that were a part of this game. Lots of inexperience, but that will of course fade over time and playing more games. So let's see what did the damage for the elves. Plenty of kills on the spears, interestingly enough, which were the first ones committed when the elves and the dwarves eventually did kick into gear. But yeah, it was very much just a slow, quite lethargic game by them. But it was all it really needed to be based on the amount of damage that the human factions were doing to one another. Like I said, I'm not too surprised to see Rune get the highest kill count on this occasion, because that was how the battle was trending, and based on how the evil men were somewhat sandwiched, albeit in a stretched manner across the whole map. They were the ones that had to face off against the most opponents today, so they ended up getting the highest kill count overall. So depending on how you look at it, you could give the victory to the evil men if that's how you like to judge your free-for-alls. Personally, I think there has to be more to it than that, especially in a game like this where, as the elves and the dwarves, you're always going to have less men, so it kind of skews the result a little bit if you look at it that way. But yeah, it's however you want to look at it, really. But yeah, I like the way Rune played. I would call Rune the MVP in this match, purely because they were put under pressure and they dealt with it reasonably well and racked up a good kill count. The attackers could definitely have done a better job in organising themselves against the runic defence, but c'est la vie. So yeah, big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle, even if I didn't get sent it personally. And yeah, it's always good to have something that's a little bit different from a large-scale siege, because they can get a little bit stale from time to time, so nice to have a free-for-all on a map like this, even if it does have some siege-like characteristics. Based on the fact that I'm sort of running very low on replays that I can use that aren't just on repeat maps, again, the last thing people want is seeing Merlond over and over again, or Bersergath over and over again. I must have been sent 6 Bersergath replays when I had already recorded 1. Yeah, I would implore the community to look for siege maps beyond Bersergath. There are more. I know that it's probably for sort of mechanical reasons. It's probably because it's reliable and it doesn't crash that much. But please, there are so many maps that people have made for this mod, not just that one and Moria. But yeah, perhaps I'm just shouting into the void in that regard. But yeah, I may, after this battle, it might be time for me to do the video where I want to talk about the Amazon Lord of the Rings series. I'll probably be recording that at some stage in November, like I said. And it probably will be the video that comes out after this one in what would have been a normal slot for a battle replay, I think. Possibly, again, a lot can change because things get a little bit hazy in my schedule when you go beyond a month out. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.